Good afternoon, everyone, both in the room and online. It's great that you can join us. I got asked, would I come and introduce the speaker? And when I was told it was Wendy, I knew I had no alternative but to say yes. But no, the serious point is it's a great delight to be here. And looking at the programme for today, it's very clear how, Southampton has a long-standing reputation in the broad area of obviously computer science, and the Turing and the role it has nationally, it's natural that we would be a partner in the Turing. So it's great that we are playing that and will continue to play that role. And of course, there's a whole range of people who have been instrumental in forging that reputation. Those reputations are through many, many years of hard work and endeavour. But there's no doubt that Wendy Hall, Professor Dame Wendy Hall, is absolutely one of the figures that has ensured Southampton's reputation in this broad area. You'll know, because I think it's largely in the room here, so I'm speaking, I guess, to those of you that are online, you'll know that Wendy is our Regius Professor of Computer Science. She also plays a role more broadly in the university, being our Associate Vice President International, and I look forward to the updates Wendy gives me of all of that work she does with alumni and colleagues across the world, projecting Southampton's reputation, which is really important these days. And there's also the director of one of our research institutes, the Web Science Institute, which of course is very much connected with today's talk. So it's very fitting that Wendy is giving today's keynote talk, because she's been instrumental in shaping not only the work here over many, many years, but a test of a university and a test of the people that make up a university is, are they influential beyond their discipline, beyond the confines of the institution? And I think there's no doubt that if you look at the UK landscape on AI, that Wendy has played a huge role in that. She was the co-chair of the UK's Artificial Intelligence Review, which was published in 2017, is the UK government's first skills champion for AI, and is a member of the AI Council. So all of those things kind of point to the regard and influence that we know that Wendy has. She's going to give a talk today to discuss the trends in AI, and I look forward to finding out what AI is. I think I heard 2 definitions in the previous talk alone, so I'm sure we'll hear another several definitions of AI in the next talk. But in particular, the implications it has for society, and effectively the need to lay out effectively a socio-technical approach to how AI itself is going to evolve in society. So I very much look forward to hearing the talk. At the end, there's going to be a chance for questions. Clearly, those in the room, you can use the normal mechanical method. You shove your hand up, basically. But those of you online can also submit questions via the Slido app, which I think you've got, and we will field a mixture of questions at the end. But you're not here to hear me talk. You're here to hear Wendy. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure to introduce Wendy Hall. Wendy.
To say, I mean, we've been in this room for 2 days. We were celebrating computer science at Southampton yesterday, and the Turing work today, and I'm so excited and thrilled. And I just want to say that it is a huge pleasure to work with Professor Mark Smith. And it's an honour. It was council today, and he made the time to come here. He must be as exhausted as I am. So on that, I don't have much time. I am starting 5 minutes late, right? So I will. Who was it? Muffy last night said I need my time, so we might run over 5 minutes. But I'll try and keep it to the 35 minutes. And I actually prepared this talk to do a keynote in San Francisco for the ACM. I keynoted their conference, their big conference, but I got COVID, so I never went. So I had to give this keynote I had to pre-record it for them. You get it live here today. It's essentially the same talk. It's high level, right? I also want to say how much I admire all the people who've given talks today. You've got your Turing fellowships, the work you're doing. It's fabulous. You're at the the coalface, the nitty gritty. You're today's pioneers, tomorrow's stars. And I'm more at the end of my career. And when you get old, you start reflecting, and you think about your legacy, and you think about the big issues. And this week, more than any, one thinks about all those sorts of things. So off we go. From Here to Eternity. How many of you know the film? Right. I didn't think I should. I wanted to put the picture up of that scene on the beach with Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr, but I thought I shouldn't, because I've also given this talk in the Middle East. So anyway, but it is a famous film, and why I call From AI to Eternity is about actually, this stuff that we're building today, for the first time in the history of AI, has the potential to significantly change society, and potentially in a very bad way. And we really need to think about, my favourite phrase at the moment is leading from the future. And we really need to be thinking about what sort of society do we want in 30, 50, 100 years' time, and then work back from that to what should we be doing today to make sure the systems that we build are fit for purpose and are good for humanity and are not going to do us real harm over time. I'll come back to that at the end of the talk. But actually, when I was doing the research for this, I was for the film From Here to Eternity, which is all about when war changed, actually. It was about when ratings started to realise that they were just being ordered around by the officers and fighting back a bit. And actually, the title was based on Rudyard Kipling's poem about gentlemen rankers, where the thing about we're poor little lambs who've lost our way, bar, bar, bar. Anyway, damned from here to eternity, God have mercy on such as we, bar, yah, bar. Anyway, I didn't know that when I was doing the research. So anyway, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. So here you are, Mark, a brief history of AI, very brief, but we Brits like to think we invented it with Turing in the 50s. Of course, the phrase was coined, the artificial intelligence phrase was coined in the US. And it was, it started as we're trying to build a human brain. We're trying to make machines that can think like human beings. That's what it started as. And in the 60s, there were hardly any computers, let alone the sort of stuff we have with days to day. So it was all about decision trees and very theoretical and abstract. Could we, the Turing test, could we actually get a machine that could pass the Turing test? That's all. We could have a whole workshop on the Turing test. What's the new Turing test today and all that. But what happens in AI? It goes in these waves. So people come up with ideas and they don't deliver anything practical. So we get the funding agencies say we're not going to fund it. So we have AI winters. And after each wave, has been an AI winter. When I started, I was a pure mathematician originally, but when I started here, I did my PhD in pure maths here, topology. There's been some talk about topology today. But anyway, when I started, I came back to Southampton in 1984, and there was a lot of AI work happening in Southampton. I came back as a computer scientist. There's a lot of work on knowledge bases. Nigel talked about those yesterday, expert systems, inference engines. There was huge funding for it, and then nothing happened. But all those things, we think of them as just everyday technologies today. But there was a funding blight. This was the funding blight in which we lost Jeff Hilton. He was doing his PhD. Jeff Hilton, who invented neural networks, always credited with inventing that. And he did his work at Edinburgh. He couldn't get funding in the UK, so he went to America and then Canada, and that's where he stayed. And you have to think, this was the moment in time when my my predecessor, who did an AI review for the government at this time, said, and you see it on YouTube, there will be no funding for AI because it doesn't do anything. Right? There was a funding blight. The researchers kept on working, and the ideas that Jeff Hilton and others came up with came back in. We were doing huge amounts of work here in the 80s and 90s on computer vision. We started experimenting with this type of technology. There was a load of money suddenly came out because this sort of started to feel real. And I can remember there was Alvey program days and all. There was the Japanese 5th generation project, and we had to beat that with the Alvey program. And Muffy Calder, who was here yesterday, was a beneficiary of that, I think. And, there was a ton of money for computer vision, speech synthesis, speech recognition. We did a load of it here. We were really top of the tree. And then it didn't deliver. It didn't seem to have an impact. Now, when I came back in '84, face recognition was considered a pretty much insoluble problem in the general. It was just too difficult. And now, even when you've got a scarf on and you can only see people's eyes, you can still, the technology is good enough to recognise that person just from their eyes. So amazing and so dangerous as well. So there was another funding winter. And then, of course, the university's researchers kept working on it. And it developed, because computers got powerful, we got more data, so you could start developing models that trained on lots of actual data. Because in the 80s, we didn't have any data, let alone the more powerful enough computers. And so we start to develop more recently, machines that can, like Alpha, the IBM machine that beat the chess champion, and DeepMind's AlphaGo, and, machines that could beat human beings because they could train fast on lots of data in niche areas. We couldn't argue, because now you think about, well, did that, the Google story, the guy who said the machine he was talking to, the AI he was talking to, was sentient, and I thought to myself, that was so like, what was that? Who can remember? The AI's Mycin, which was in the 80s, which is an expert system that pretended to be a doctor. It was very good, but so we have someone in this department, I don't know if he's here or listening, who will argue that nobody has consciousness, not even human beings, we're all machines. That's Paul Smart, if you want to read his papers. So, this idea of sentient and consciousness, we've all that to explore, and what would it mean anyway? So my question, as we have, suddenly this thing is big because it's beginning to impact industry, but we have to see what the actual effects are going to be in terms of our lives. And, you can train a machine, whether it doesn't have to be a robot, software, to do a particular thing in the niche. Can we get that? Can we make it broader? So when you're learn in one area, you can then learn in another area. And are we really aim? Is this all hype? Is this hype? Is it going to deliver the impact that the governments who are funding the companies, or the researchers, or the investors who are funding the companies, or the governments funding the researchers, is it going to deliver that impact? Will we have another AI winter? I think the jury's out on that. But for sure, this is not the end of AI. I don't believe that machine learning on lots of data is going to deliver artificial general intelligence, right? But the question is, when we can, because there's a lot more to come, brain-computer interfaces, neuromorphic computing, AI will not stay the same, Mark. It will not always be machine learning. And we need more than machine learning to get to the point that the original pioneers are envisaging. But what happens when we get to that point? This is not what the sci-fi sort of world is. Anyway, so I'll go back a bit now. What I've said, why now? Why is this gone big now? Because we've got big, fast computers and lots of data. And we all know there are amazing opportunities. Health. I do worry about automated vehicles. I just don't know how it's going to work. I just can't see how it's going to work. How we get from here to there. I think actually the drone taxis are going to come on faster than the automated cars taxis. I'm not sure I've got the courage to go in either. But anyway, that's another topic. Education, I firmly believe AI can transform education, not by replacing teachers, but augmenting teachers, giving everybody their own personal tutor, that grows up with them. We've done all sorts of projects here and that sort of stuff. Energy, climate change, there's so many things that I will make the point, and people say, oh, we've got technology can solve this. Can I make the point that technology created the problems that we have today? Right? Everything to do with climate change is because someone invented electricity, and we found it incredibly useful, and it makes our lives a lot better. right? You can't uninvent it. So, you know, we actually have a duty to try and help solve the problem, but I worry that in solving that problem we'll create others, but that's another story altogether. So, as Mark said, I, out of the blue, got a phone call from Theresa May's office to ask me to I haven't got time to go into details, co-chair this review, and it was meant to be, it was about growing the industry in the UK. It was about economic growth and creating jobs, because there was this huge cult in 2017. There was this huge thing about the consultancy companies were saying everybody's job, you know, your job's gone, right? We're going to have these huge unemployment problems, and we don't know how we're going to deal with it. Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if that was our problem today? Right? We could do with some AI to do the mundane work and relieve human beings to do the work that the caring work and the social work and the just doing gardens for the elderly folk work and all those sorts of things that at the moment AI can't do. So I never bought into that. And, you know, well, I didn't know about COVID, of course, but I've never bought into that. I think AI will relieve us from all sorts of things and help us do other things better, rather than take everybody's jobs and leave us all unemployed. But anyway, so we did it, and it was accepted. It was accepted by the government. We had 20 recommendations, which were all accepted, but some more than others. And I signed off a £1 billion cheque with Greg Clark, Matt Hancock, and Jerome Pacenti, who was he's now Vice President of AI at Facebook. He was then Chief Executive of Benevolent AI. And that's the largest cheque I've ever wrote. And I kept saying to Matt, if the government defaults on this, do we have to pay? So he assured us we wouldn't have to. And then he went off to DCMS and then resigned. Anyway, but Greg Clark is. But anyway, they were very good at getting this through. It became part of the industrial strategy, a sector deal, which meant, I didn't know what a sector deal was when we started. It meant that they could put money into this to help the industry sector grow. But of course, it wasn't like pharma or aero or auto or agriculture, because it was a horizontal, not a vertical. So they'd never done that before. And it was a very exciting moment. The key recommendations, it's all online. You notice we put first a bit about data sharing, data trust, because we thought that was the biggest issue. That's what industry told us was the biggest issue to solve. We're still nowhere near solving it. If Michael Boniface is watching, he will know the problems we've got at the moment, trying to work with the hospital. But we put that first. Of course, skills is really important, and some of you here have benefited from. We had the call for 1,000 PhDs, so CTTs and PhDs, industry-funded AI, MSc scholarships, because industry says we want machine learning programmers. Turing fellowships, I always say it takes a long time to grow an AI professor. They don't grow on trees. And so for every one of those students, PhD students, you need at least one supervisor, if not two. Got to keep that pipeline going. And I'll come back to diversity in a minute. As Adrian Smith said this morning, we established the Alan Turing Institute, the National Institute for AI and Data Science. And we also, there was a lot of recommendations, significant number of recommendations about how we help both the public and private sectors to use and adopt AI to the benefit of the economy through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. The Office for AI was set up between DCMS and Bayes, and the AI Council was set up. And as Mark said, I was created, they had to give me a title, so I became the AI Skills Champion. But I have been involved very much in the development of skills as part of this. The proudest moment I have was in the report we recognised that if we just put a lot of funding in to make people machine learning programmers, we're not dealing with gender diversity, because we're taking the pipeline of computer scientists, mathematicians who want to be programmers. And so we do fund MSCs to develop machine learning programmers, but we also funded these conversion courses where the government funded 2,500 places for AI and data science MSCs. I don't know if it says MSc anywhere. These are MSCs. 1,000 of those government-funded scholarships had to be awarded to underrepresented groups. And in the first round, it was women, black students and disabled students. And it has been a game changer. Those courses, there have been lots of people applying, and we have upped the game on those courses in terms of diversity. It's a drop in the ocean, tip of the iceberg, but they've funded that all again. So, all those programs, there's more funding coming through. So, and I hope to get more diversity into the calls that come out as they go forward. I'll say a bit more about that later. So, how do we think about ethics and AI? Well, the UK, it trips over ethics, AI and ethics centres. We have a lot, I chair the Ada Lovelace Institute, for example. There's the one at Cambridge. There's the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation that we put into our review never really became what it should have been. There's a gap there. There's the Luciano's lab in Oxford. The Alan Turing Institute has a data ethics group. There's what the Digital Catapult does. And what Nigel talked about yesterday was the big donation they got in Humanities at Oxford Institute for Ethics and AI. So when I say it takes a long time to grow an AI professors are very expensive. And every country in the world wants them. If you want to get a top AI professor these days, you've got to pay a lot of money. And to put a group around them will cost you even more. So basically, the universities that gain are the universities that already have strong AI, which of course includes Southampton. You've got the Oxford, Cambridge, Manchester, Edinburgh. But it includes, of course, we're up there in that we have some really good people and we can encourage younger people to come in. We're not necessarily going to be able to afford to buy a big AI group. That would cost tens of millions of pounds. But we can encourage the strong pipeline in this area. And thanks to our Vice-Chancellor, we've got a growth plan that is working and we can do that. But I also say it costs a lot to create so we're a create an AI group, and if you haven't got one, to create one's really hard. So people all around the world that haven't got AI groups are trying to build them, and ethics professors don't cost anything like as much as an AI professor, right? So it's true. So you see all these things getting set up because they don't cost as much to get set up, but what do they actually do? I don't have time. I'm probably running out already. To talk through this with you in detail, I fly around the world talking about this stuff, and there are national strategies. I tell you though, when you go, I'm going to the Middle East a lot now. I was in Saudi Arabia last week. It's amazing. It's really opened up. I couldn't believe it. No segregation of women and men, didn't have to wear anything special when I got off the plane, and they're so excited about this. And I got 10 minutes at the AI Summit to talk about the UK's national AI strategy. 10 minutes. Next week in Sharjah, I've got 5 minutes. Why? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But then they come and talk, they have lots of separate meetings afterwards. That's the way they do it. So, that's another story. I sang for my supper at the British Embassy, and the British Embassy is one of the few places in Saudi Arabia where you can get alcohol. That was fun. So, anyway, it's true. So they know. It's not illegal. It's just that's where you can have a glass of wine there. So there are a number of nations that are thinking about ethical principles and their national strategies. We did it after our Jerome and my AI review, the House of Lords report under Tim Clement-Jones, who's absolutely awesome, and he knows a lot about ethics. He was a lawyer before. They produced their report, which had much more about ethics in it. There was a bishop, was it the Bishop of London at the time, on their panel, and he came up with the 10 Commandments of AI. And it was a much more, they were quite good, and it was a much more, our report was very much about growing the economy, jobs. The House of Lords was much more, how are we going to do this so that it works well for society? That's sort of left as, that's the UK's sort of current publication in this area. The EU, of course, I'm not a great fan of GDPR, but I am a fan of the fact that the EU are leading from the front on this. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Data protection is their sort of everything's built on that. But they have been talking about this from the very, as it emerged. And their work came out in 2019. And of course, we've seen the AI Act being passed in their parliament since. Beijing has its AI principles. They care as much about this as we do. There's just one difference in China. Government has the right to look at everybody's data. Right? It's a different culture, different values. We wouldn't accept that. But they are my friends at Xinhua were very much involved in producing the Beijing AI principles in 2019. And last week in Saudi Arabia, you can't really see it, but that says at the top right, that's the prince who runs Saudi Arabia, his Vision 2030, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, AI ethics principles. I thought, what world am I in? What world am I in? Just amazing. That, and they mean it. I mean, they have set up, the Vision 2030 says they will become the world-leading AI country. I don't know if they mean just in the Middle East or the whole world. Are they going to beat US and China? But, they're really setting out. And I'm on they've got this new sort of linear future city that they're building called NEOM. And I've gone on the technical advisory board for that. And it's all about data governance and having a data governance principles, a separate system. It's like a state within a state. I don't know quite how they're going to do it, but so that the data governance principles in NEOM will be different to the data governance principles in the rest of Saudi Arabia to try and attract businesses and tourism. Anyway, there you go, different worlds. And then we have the issue of AI regulation as part of national strategies. The EU's, I don't think I've put the Act in here, but they're motoring ahead with what they're going to do. People disagree and agree with the approach, but they have, this is the Chinese government focusing on algorithms, and the US and EU are sort of talking about, set up against China, about an agreement on how artificial intelligence, and there's the example of, face recognition and surveillance, which of course all countries are doing now. We don't know in the UK. We haven't got real regulation. I mean, there's people in the audience who know much more about this than I do, but, there's people experimenting, and we have lots of CCTV around. So it's creeping in. It's more about the EU and US. And where are we on this? Well, I've got a meeting next week. The council, we're going to hear, there was just in July, there was an AI governance and regulation draft came out, and they're aiming to produce the white paper by December. So in July, they released, we've got a new strategy, which I helped work on, but that was produced by the Office for AI, and an action plan, and one of those is that the governance and regulation white paper will be published before Christmas, give or take the odd change of Prime Minister and death of a Queen and so on. The draft's out, the comments are due in next week, and we have a meeting next week to review the responses to the draft. So they're taking a sort of innovation approach, is what they call it. And so that's the sort of anti-EU thing. But I mean, we have to obviously align with the EU, I think, in some way. So we can't be too orthogonal to that. So it's really interesting how we're going to, I think we will approach it from an audit point of view. I think that's my bet. That's what I'd do if it were me. Like we do with finances, and impose the regulation through a sort of audit approach rather than some, it's got to be fair, it's got to be transparent, all these sort of things that are hard to define. Well, let's actually say, every year or every 5 years, you've got to report on what your system does, what the output is, how you determine whether there's any bias or not, the stuff you were talking about, Stuart, today. These things need to be captured, I think, in principles. We don't want the government heavy-handed regulating, but we need some system. We're good at that in the UK. So, and I'm working on that with the island of Jersey. Very interesting project, which I haven't got time to tell you about now. So, I'll skim through this. The point I want to make here is, somebody referred to this earlier, I can't remember who it was, our book, Tom. We wrote this book about the four internets, Kieran and I, and you may say, the point, this is about internet governance. I'm going to whiz through it in 5 minutes, but 2 minutes, but 3 minutes. But the point is, we think that AI regulation will go in the same way, because it's all about geopolitics and cultural values and how cyberspace is regulated. And that's AI. Our argument is it will all go the same because we have different cultural values. You know, there's a talk about will the internet split. We don't think it's US, China, but actually it's all networks of networks. So how does it actually split? As this slide says, it's not inevitable. It's a network of networks. It's unlikely to splinter in any form. While the technical standards hold, TCP/IP, while they hold, that was what formed the beginning of the internet, the openness of the value of openness and sharing and open standards and freedom of speech. But those led to the original, what we call the Silicon Valley open internet, where anyone can talk to anyone and anyone can get on and do anything. If that splits, and China's been trying to influence new internet standards, if we don't have global agreement on standards, then all bets are off as to what happens. You'll have an internet that's more like a telephone system, and you'd have to, yeah, it will just, it will all change, but other things could come along. But that van, by the way, is the van that Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn drove around in. So now it's 50 years in 24, so it's nearly 50 years ago. They're celebrating the anniversary in 2024. I've just been asked to speak at the event, 2024. Nicola, where are you? They got TCP/IP and they wanted to get people to use it. So they had no email, of course. You wrote letters in those days. So rather than ask permission to put TCP/IP on, they walked in. They took that van around the US, and walked into the companies that were running big computer systems and said, "Can we put our protocols on your system?" And at the time, people would say, "Yeah, sure. Well, what does it matter?" So they go in, install the protocols, and then go back to the van and send them a message. And you know, that was actually how they got people to use. And Peter Kirstein picked it up and brought it over to the UK. He was the first in Europe to do that, and he got it, and they started. But it was all about going around and not asking permission, asking forgiveness. No, not asking for forgiveness afterwards. Anyway, that's an amazing story. Vint Cerf is one of my favourite people on the planet. There's all sorts of problems with openness, and the point to make here is that whilst we would, you know, fight to the death for freedom of speech, the problems that openness and lack of control give you are that, you know, people can do what they like. There's development of fake news, of privacy breaches, all sorts of, you know, Tim always says, Tim Berners-Lee, if I knew the bad things people were going to do with the web, which of course he built on top of the internet, I would have put much more security into the protocols. But the question you'd have to ask retrospectively was would that have stopped people using it? The point about everyone started using the web because it was free and easy. So, you know, these are balances, and you've got the balance between democracy and autocracy or control, and you've got the balance between privacy and surveillance. You know, these are real balances that you have to trade off, and it all depends on what your cultural values are. So these are our 3+1 other internets, and I haven't got time to go through them. I'm going to run out of time. The Brussels bourgeois internet, that's Kieran's names, is about data protection. That's their foremost ideas. The Beijing paternal internet, or you could call it surveillance internet, is all about having control. And from the very get-go, the China has made sure they know what people are doing on the internet. They see it both as allowing people to do things that are, you know, exchange information, but also finding out what they're talking about. And the third one is the fourth one actually, is the commercial internet, because in our world, all the big companies are in America and the West Coast, and they lobby Washington to get the laws, the regulations that they need to make money, which is fair enough. It's a different culture. So they do that and try and, I saw Mark looking at his watch, I need to move on. We call Moscow the spoiler model because it's we don't give them the credit of being a separate internet. They need to use the internet. Oh God, just thinking about Putin on the telly this morning. But they need to use the internet to hack and to send out disinformation and trolling, and just because they can to bring down our economies. They have other ways of doing that, of course, with fuel. But anyway, so we call that the spoiler model. So our four internets are Silicon Valley, Europe, Beijing and Washington. Those are the cultural values, and we argue that AI regulation will go the same way. Oh, that slide's not come across very well. This is meant to say that we now have 6% of the world on the internet. Where can it grow? It's going to grow in rural China, Africa and India. China's already influencing much of Africa, and of course we know what will happen in rural China. So we call India, and if you do the numbers, North America and Europe is tiny compared to China, Africa, India and the Middle East. If they all go the way of the Beijing paternal model, we will end up with an internet and maybe AI regulation that works for us but doesn't work for most of the world. So that's our argument in the book, and we call India the swing state. They've done very well with their Aadhaar ID. I can't pronounce it, my apologies to anyone from India in the audience. Their identity program, they've given everybody in India an ID, whether they had a birth certificate or not. They're now, I'm on their advisory board for MOSIT, which is all about making that open source and giving it to other developing countries. And guess what one of the first countries was to take it? The Philippines. Now, they had a wonderful autocratic dictator at the time. So there's all sorts of ethics here. But they also are pushing, the Modi government is pushing for more Chinese-style censorship and reduction of privacy protections. The courts are protecting that at the moment, but you know, it really depends how they go, because they've got the economy of scale. I could go on. Anyway, we think that this will also impact AI regulation. That's why I've told you that story, because it's the same values and it's the same sort of commercial drive, and it's all about, yeah, it's effectively what that region of the world, the cultural values that they have in order to say, this is what you do and this is what you won't do. And we just say, well, we've got this awful issue about how do we, you know, this online safety bill that basically says, leaves it up to the companies to decide what is okay and what's not. And I heard Jeremy Vine this morning on the radio. He's been trolled by someone on the internet who's now in prison for doing that, but he still has a Twitter account. So from the jail, he can still tweet awful things about Jeremy Vine. I mean, that's just not credible, is it? But on the other hand, Twitter took down the Twitter account of the democratically elected president of the US, and they still haven't reinstated it. So these that's Twitter. They're small compared to the Facebooks and the Googles and the Microsofts a bit. You know, what power should they have? So I'm nearly at the end, by the way. You're pleased to know. Oh, chairs. I'm sort of in the Stephen Hawking camp, who in a BBC interview just before he died said the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Martin Rees, in his new book, is in that camp as well. He thinks we're all going to evolve into cyborgs, basically. Whether you count that as we just become electronic. Whether you count that as the end of the human race or not, I don't know. Stephen Hawking's argument is that if you have machines that can think like human beings, build themselves, make themselves more intelligent, they will out-evolve us because we are biological, and we'll just become the Matrix. I've got a picture here of the Matrix, actually. There, right? So I will come back to here. Who knows what website that is? Huh? I heard the answer. DeepMind, yes. Hello. Did you? No, you didn't work for them, did you? No. Yeah. Anyway, they don't tell you who they are. Interestingly enough, but they're you know, I have a lot of respect for Demis Hassabis and DeepMind and what they do, and they say AI could be one of humanity's most useful inventions, and they basically say that they are going to develop artificial general intelligence, full AI, as Stephen Hawking calls it. And they say we're a team of scientists, engineers, ethicists, and more committed to solving intelligence to advance science benefit humanity. I hear them say it. What they do is produce AI stuff that's better than other people's AI stuff. It's still mostly technicians doing that. They do a lot for diversity in the sense they fund a lot of these MSCs, the conversion MSCs. They do a lot for getting women into PhDs programs. But we're moving into the world of the functional, what's it called, foundational models. I don't know why they're called foundational models, large language models. GPT-3 from OpenAI, which can produce really quite beautiful stuff as well as rubbish. How this is going to evolve. There's been several talks about this sort of thing today, and what the impact's going to be on society. And then the Chinese are in there, and our very own professor, Jay Tang, who we had a seminar from this morning, is one of the leaders of the Wu Dao team in Beijing, which can beat GPT-3, I think. Is that right? Is it fast? I'm looking at you. You were on the seminar this morning.
10 times faster.
Huh?
10 times larger.
Yeah. That's what they claim. I don't know if it, but you know, this stuff, I find this whole thing so scary. So we come to Web3. Tim's doing solid, but the whole Web3 movement is about recasting the internet, giving us back our data, but in a way that actually it's still controlled by the big companies because they're going to run the metaverse and the crypto and where is this all going, and who's going to regulate the metaverse, and how is that going to interoperate with the internet? I mean, these things are really, and are we just going to say we're just going to be the biofuel for the machines in the future? So I don't want that. I want us to do this stuff, but I want us to do it in a way that we're conscious, if that has any meaning. Paul Smart, if you're around, we're conscious of what we're doing. We do it with our eyes open and thinking about the sort of society we want to build with this. So I've put my bet on human-centered AI. We did call it AI for the future society, but Stanford called it human-centered AI, so you can't buck Stanford, so I thought we ought to, I'm just saying, you know. And also, so we have started a program, PhD program here, that's through the Web Science Institute, and a colleague from the States, Ben Schneiderman, has written a new book on human-centered AI. Now this is, Stuart, your talk was great on human in the loop. This is broader than that, as, you know, this is about how do we take the web science model of how you think about getting all the different disciplines to help think about how the internet and the web grow and what the impact is for society as we move forward. Doing that for AI. I think we can really do that at Southampton because we have all the experience of what we've done in the Web Science Institute, and we can now apply that, and we can really be, HCAI can be for AI what HCI was for computer science. So we need, as my last slide, I like to think about the future, as I said, should work back from eternity to AI. And my colleague and mentor, Karen Spark-Jones, who, if you don't know, invented the technology that the internet, all the speech recognition technology and the search methods that they use for searching, like Google, came from her. She doesn't get enough recognition. And she had this famous phrase, computing is too important to be left to men. And it's not to denigrate men, it's to say, actually, it's just too important. We need the whole of society involved. So I now say AI is too important to be left to computer scientists. I'm not wearing the T-shirt today, but my mantra is if it's not diverse, it's not ethical. And I'm now starting to try and get diversity into AI regulation. I think that's the only way we're going to achieve this. We need the lawyers, we need the ethicists, we need the sociologists, psychologists, political scientists, economists, business schools, historians, creative arts to help us find our way. Thank you. What's the time?
It's about 6 o'clock, so...
Well, I did claim an extra 5 minutes, but I know I overran, so a couple of questions.
A few questions. Any in the audience, or one over there?
Sammy. It's one of our PhD.
Thanks for a really awesome talk, and I love your last slide.
Of course you did.
Obviously, you know. I found it really interesting what you were saying from the ethical perspective, because obviously, you know, accountability, transparency, explainability, all those words are things we hear constantly with respect to ethics. But what you said about, you know, electricity and technology potentially making things worse as well, I think that's a really good point. And how do we actually measure that from an ethical perspective, like the trade-offs, particularly for AI geared towards sustainability? How can we look at something and go, is this worth it?
I think back to how the inventors of electricity, I mean, look what electricity's done for the world. I mean, just amazing. But we love it too much. And it's a bit like that with the what happened with the web and the big, that we love, don't we? The shopping online, the social, the gaming, the social networks, and we love it, right? No one forces us to do any of this stuff. Well, COVID, I suppose, forced us to shop online, and where would we have been in COVID without all that stuff? And TikTok, which of course is Chinese. So, you know, it's when you look back, I mean, we've talked about this in Web Science endlessly. What would we have done at the beginning? And, you know, talk with Tim about this. What would we have done at the beginning of the web if we knew what was going to happen? Well, actually, you'd be China. A bit, right? You know, is it possible to do what China does? Because actually, is it possible to do what China does with our values of freedom of speech and, you know, the not having the government look at all our data? So is there a way you could merge the EU model and what China does in order to create, and merge them all together to create a better internet system? Because actually, if you accept the cultural values of China and that your government's looking at everything, they have data protection laws for businesses in China, so businesses can't look at all other, you know, they have to be careful what they do with the data. But if you accept all that, it's actually a safer place to be on the internet in China. It's just you don't have to retrospectively work out how you stop trolling, or because it doesn't happen because people get put in jail for doing it and they don't do it, basically. I'm not saying that's good, but it's like, could you know, the social credit system. I mean, we do have in finance, Tom help me, we have credit, what do? People look up your credit score, right, for finance. Is there a way of doing that in a democracy for social media? I haven't had time, but I keep meaning to organise a Web Science workshop about that, because it's like, surely we could do something that says, like this guy who's gone to prison for trolling Jeremy Vine and other people, you know, I mean, that's right. He's broken a law, but there's stuff, anyway, so what was your question? What do we do? I do think, I am a firm believer that in being practical, I think we need to talk about ethics. We've talked about trying to do it like medical ethics. It doesn't, in fact, this new BRC bid we've got is all about experimental medicine. So we could try something. You know, we look at how the medics do it, not always perfectly, but they do have a code of practice that they have to swear to. You know, the Hippocratic Oath. And I just think that there must be a way, I don't think we can do the same in AI, but there must be a way that we can look at what's happened with finance and actually say, you know, from quite soon we could produce some auditing guidelines that, you know, that would actually be the beginnings of that. That's my take on where we go. That's what I'm going to say to the government next week.
Thank you.
Don't know I'm right. I've no idea if I'm right. Oh, it's hot in here, isn't it? I can see everyone going to sleep. Hot and stuffy.
Oh, hello. Yeah, that I really agree with the last stuff you were just saying. It makes total sense. They've got the MiFID regulations with finance for automated trading, and they're actually looking at, like, you know, specifying the algorithms and stuff like that so that they can't manipulate the markets. So I think AI has to be a bit like that, and it's really just at the software level. I mean, we haven't solved explainable software, let alone explainable AI. So, you know, if we can basically make the code itself explainable and verifiable, then we can build everything on top of that. And then once it's open, you open source the code, and now everyone can read what the code's doing. And
what regulates them?
Yeah, that's this kind of thing. Yeah, so that's.
As soon as you make it open, anyone can do with it, whether they are good or evil. And I talk about evil in this because I think the people who do bad things to us on the internet and are going to do bad things to us with AI, are genuinely evil people.
One final question?
You have to pass it across.
Thank you. So, thank you for your talk. It was really nice. I wanted to ask you something. Since you've been at the forefront of doing regulations for all of these AI things, and you've mentioned GPT-3 and all these big models, and as we know, these have been trained on supercomputers with a lot of compute power and a lot of emissions, since you've been talking about climate change and all this stuff. Do you envision having regulations which kind of put a limit to how much you could be training this stuff for, such that we don't emit so much? And how would that impact the AI growth going forward? And do you think this, like throwing big supercomputers at whatever problem and just training
Well,
for
I go
hours
back to
is
our
a
four.
sustainable thing?
I go back to our four internets model. You could probably make it work in Europe. The American companies would demand, they need to be, they'll try and keep it as green as possible, but they need the access to that power, and they'll lobby Washington to get that. And in China, they'll just do it anyway. And that's basically our thesis, right? And we have these competing models. I think we need to finish now. It was a very good questions. Thank you.
So it's just my job to draw the proceedings to a close. And I wasn't looking at my watch, by the way. Yeah, it was very, very unfair on me. But nevertheless, no, shit. But the, can I say, totally fascinating. And I think what you've done for me, and I'm sure for other people in the audience, is opened up some of the huge questions that we're going to need to deal with. There's one thing you didn't say, and I'm a little bit hesitant to say, but I will, is that that's what you vote politicians for, to make those decisions on our behalf.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the recent record isn't very good, I have to say, but nevertheless, that's the. But I was trying to think there, what are the consequences of the regulatory regimes in the backdrop of different political systems, which was one of the key points that you were making there. And I think that's a really interesting question, particularly as the whole system is connected up. So there are a huge number of questions in there. And the one thing that struck me early on in your talk was I never thought that climate change was Michael Faraday's fault, but I've changed my mind as you were speaking. And I'm sure he doesn't deserve that. But nevertheless, of course, the key point there is you don't know what the consequences of what you unleash, and that is clearly came across in your talk as well. But anyway, can I ask us again to thank Wendy? It was a great talk, and it's really great that Southampton is engaged in some of these really big questions.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.